Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's Society of American Military Engineers webcast. As the last few participants are logging in, I have some housekeeping items I'd like to highlight. A reminder, this presentation is being recorded. All participants are in a listen-only mode, and due to privacy concerns, you will only see your own name in the attendee list. If you're having difficulties with WebEx, please refer to the chat box on the right side of the screen. I am adding some technical help information there, including today's WebEx technical support number. You are encouraged to submit questions at any time, so they may be queued for today's question and answer session. Just type into the Q&A feature on the bottom right corner of your screen and click the send button. Please do not change the ask option. We have that defaulted to send to all of our panelists. With that said, let's begin. I'll turn the presentation over to your first speaker and host today, Major John Moran.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Major John Moran, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. A little bit about myself. I'm currently a reservist mobilized here at the United States Central Command in Tampa, Florida on MacDill Air Force Base. And on behalf of the SAME Tampa Bay Post and SAME National, I want to welcome you to the second of our two webinars. This one titled United States Army Corps of Engineers South Atlantic Division Program Overview. These webinars are part of our educational component of the Post Joint Training and Education Day, also known as JTED, which will be coming up on Wednesday, February 28th. While we know many of you can't travel to Tampa to attend our JTED event in person next week, we hope these webinars at least provide some value and some insight into what we're looking at next week. However, if you can make the trip to Tampa, the weather is lovely this time of year, and we have a great program to include an icebreaker on Tuesday evening, February 27th, on the Victory Ship near downtown Tampa, followed by a full day of presentations, briefings, and panel discussions on Wednesday, February 28th. So now onto this webinar, which will last about an hour. We've got about 45 minutes for Mr. Lee to present, and then we've set aside 10 minutes for questions and answers. And like Tyler said, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A area on the screen. I will group questions together that are similar, and we'll address those, and I'll present those to Mr. Lee at the end. Also, this presentation, like Tyler said, is being recorded, and the slides will be posted on the SAME Tampa Bay Post JTED page. So if you want to grab these slides, or if you missed something, or Mr. Lee went over something fast, you want to go back to it, there will be a link on our page to these slides, and then there's some good contact information within the slides that Mr. Lee is going to encourage you to use as well. So we are honored to have Mr. Alvin Lee, the Division Program Director, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, South Atlantic Division, here with us on this webinar today. Mr. Lee joined the South Atlantic Division of the United States Army Corps of Engineers in January of 2014, and he currently serves as the Division Program Director. Based out of Atlanta, Mr. Lee oversees work in the Southeast United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He's responsible for Corps of Engineers civil works missions consisting of navigation, flood control, stream bank and shore protection, hurricane and storm damage reduction, emergency preparedness, response and recovery, hydropower, water supply, recreation, permitting, and environmental protection and recovery. He's also responsible for real estate for the Army and Air Force, and the South Atlantic Division has 3,815 employees and an annual operating budget of $3.5 billion. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for supporting SAME and participating today. And now let's move on to the presentation. Remember the Q&A section on the bottom right. Type it in. And Mr. Lee, I'll hand it over to you so you can begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Major Moran. I really appreciate the introduction. For the rest of everyone on the line, I'll give you a little more background. Prior to my arrival here at South Atlantic Division, I served in the Mississippi Valley Division as a Regional Business Director, and then prior to that, I spent 26 years on active duty and retired at, my last assignment was in Headquarters USACE as the Executive Director for Civil Works. But it is a pleasure to be with you today, and what I want to do in the briefing is I'm going to talk a little bit big picture about USACE. In the first couple of slides, I'll talk about our MIL program and Civil Works program, International Interagency Support Program, and then get into probably what has a lot of interest, especially for the the corporate members is kind of a layout of our programs, what we see coming down the pipe in 2018 and 2019, and even beyond that a little bit. And then I want to talk about what just occurred, the bipartisan budget bill of 2018 that appropriated the Corps of Engineers $17.4 billion in response to Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And then I want to kind of close up with a little discussion on the President's infrastructure initiative that he laid out in the recent State of the Union address. At least he talked about some of the principles associated with that, and then there was a rollout of that initiative recently, and so I want to cover that a little bit. So I'll start off just kind of as an overview. The Corps of Engineers is a large organization. We are dispersed across the globe, and we have a lot of different areas that we impact, and that starts in construction, planning, natural resource management. Probably some of you have heard this before, but we actually have more park rangers than the National Park Service to manage the lakes and reservoirs that we have all over the continental United States. We also are involved in energy and sustainability, capacity building, especially in the work that we've done post 9/11 in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places around the world. And of course, we could not deliver what we do across the globe without our partnerships with industry. Industry helps us get it done, and I'll show you a slide a little later that kind of shows how industry fits into the bigger picture on the execution of what we do, both on the military side and the civil side in our missions. The next topic I'll cover here just briefly is our lines of efforts and priorities. The Corps of Engineers, these are our major lines of effort. We have a pretty robust overseas contingency operation and expeditionary missions wherever we get called to go. And we have forces currently all over the Middle East and very prominent in Iraq and Afghanistan currently. We also provide quality of support to soldiers, civilians, families, and the public on our military installations and also our public facilities, many of our reservoirs and lake projects that we have that also produce hydropower across the nation. One of the things that's probably been in the news lately since last August, September, is the hurricane response and recovery that's going on in Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We've been a big part of that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the briefing. But we have currently deployed into Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands handling debris missions, also temporary power, and that's putting large-scale generators in. We installed more than 1,500 generators in Puerto Rico and following Hurricane Irma and Maria. And just to give you a little bit of scope on that, that's larger than Katrina, Sandy, and several other disasters combined as far as temporary power mission. We also have restoring the grid, electrical grid down in Puerto Rico. We are assisting FEMA and the Puerto Rican PREPA is what they call the Puerto Rican Electrical Authority in reestablishing and repairing the grid after it was heavily damaged after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. And then our final kind of main mission is our military civil works research and development programs and projects that we have all around the world. And our key priorities, these are three kind of focus areas that General Seminat, when he came in as a chief, kind of laid out to the enterprise, is strengthening our foundation. That's looking at the things that we do routinely and making sure that we're doing those consistently across the enterprise and to a high standard. And then, of course, our second priority is delivering the program. And I've kind of covered what that program entails, but it's a pretty robust program across the board, and it looks like it's growing into the future. And then the third priority is achieving the vision. That's looking ahead to see what's changing, and there are a lot of changes that you've probably seen in the past year, and we expect some more changes through the administration, and I'll talk about some of those later in the infrastructure initiative part of this presentation. This slide kind of depicts how USACE and Industry works together. We have about 35,000 core employees, and then we leverage construction contractors who basically perform 100% of the civil works and military construction, and it's a major impact on what they do and how they're able to do it. But we also are tied together with sponsors, federal agencies, and associations, and then we also have A&E firms that support our efforts and perform about 65% of the planning and design for all of the projects that the Corps of Engineers execute across the nation. And so this allows us to maintain a core capability in the Corps and then leverage private sector to help us really get the job done when we get large amounts of requirements put on us to do things for the nation. So that's how we operate. And so now what I want to show you is a little bit of our program. If you would have looked at this program 10 years ago, it would have looked a lot differently. But in South Atlantic Division, and our region includes North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama in the core part of that, and then we also have the U.S. territories in Puerto Rico. So what's changed is you used to see a large MILCON program in South Atlantic Division, and now that's transitioned. MILCON, after the last BRAC, has kind of went down pretty substantially, and what we've seen is a pickup in what we call SRM. And SRM is where we work on the installations to provide the installation support. That's the sustainment, readiness, and modernization work that's on our installations. And so if you would have seen this earlier, we had a lot larger MILCON program and a very small SRM program. And so what that means for our districts is our districts are a lot more reimbursable, sort of like private sector. Customers come to us to do work for them. And we have a pretty diverse customer base that we service across USACE. And what this program shows, if you look up to FY17, is our expenditures. If you look FY18 and beyond, that's our program amounts. And really what looks pretty solid is 18 through 21. That's kind of our what we call the future year development plan, or the FIDEP. Those numbers are pretty solid. After you get past that, there's some uncertainty in that, and it's subject to change. You've probably heard the President talk about some of the key things are going on related to additional funding for DOD. We don't know what that really means yet for impacting the programs that you see on the right-hand side of this chart: real estate, environmental, international, interagency support, SRM, or MILCON. But, you know, as soon as those appropriations occur this year, we'll have some indications of the way the department will spend those funds and source those requirements. And then the next slide is our Civil Works program. And what you'll see is we have a large O&M program, operations and maintenance. We have a pretty substantial construction general program in South Atlantic Division. We have some very high-profile projects in the region. On the civil side, we have a lot of port deepenings. We also have the Herbert Hoover Dike, which is a dam safety project down in Florida, and a lot of other high-profile projects in the region. And then you can barely see the blue line on the bottom of this chart, but if you look under general, it's categorized general investigations. You can kind of see where our funding has steadily decreased over time. and that's our planning capability. And so that does affect our ability for future projects in the future of having those projects kind of as seed corn for future work that the Corps of Engineers can do. But that's not all bad news, because we have a substantial backlog in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and there's plenty of work left and on the books to get accomplished if we get the appropriations to do that. So now what I'd like to do is shift gears a little bit and run through our districts. And again, these slides will be provided to you, but I want to kind of show you what our programs look like in 18 and 19 and a little bit beyond in some cases, just so you get a perspective on that. And I'll start with, we have 5 districts in South Atlantic Division. I'll start with Charleston and work my way around in alphabetical order, and this will give you some indication of what our district's programs look like, both on the military, SRM, and civil side. So Charleston, this is the first slide for them. This is some of their contracting opportunities, and this is mainly on the civil side. You'll see there we're doing what I refer to as a mega project in Charleston, and that project is underway. So the first one on that line has been awarded. There's additional contract for Lake Marion Moultrie that's been awarded, and then the O&M upper reaches for Charleston Harbor has been awarded. But there's the 3 projects below that in second quarter FY18. There's 2 ditching jobs and a beach renourishment job for Myrtle Beach. That's going out, and you can kind of see the categories and the procurement methodology that we're using. In IFB, if you're not familiar with that, it's just our kind of low bid is what everybody refers to it. It's just a simple bid. And then the RFP is our request for proposals. And so that's a more deliberative process of putting together an acquisition team and coming up with the selection criteria and then selecting the contractor for those awards. The next slide here, this kind of shift gears a little bit and really looks at some of the SRM work that we do across the nation, and you can see the different customers that we have. Some of them are the Air Force, some of them are the 81st Regional Support Command in different geographic locations, and then also there's some work at Fort Jackson on updating and upgrading Sims Lake after that breach that occurred a few years back, some upgrading of control points, access control points, and some other force protection improvements. And you can see the type of work it is, the projected advertisement date, and then the estimated award value and the set-aside category, if there is one. And some of that is to be determined, and because they're still doing some market research to make the decision of which way they go. One of the things you'll see in Charleston right now is there are quite a few small business set-asides, and the reason for that is because of the large contracts that are going on for the Charleston Deepening Project. Those are mainly large contractors that are executing that work because of the equipment and capability required to execute that type of work. So you will see a lot of set-asides going on at this particular point in time for the Charleston District. The next slide, these are some additional customers that the Charleston District has. The VA, again, construction, that's all this is top work for the VA, Fort Jackson National Cemetery, and you'll see some work that we're doing in Brooklyn, New York, and Battle Creek, Michigan, in helping do some renovations there. Again, the ranges for those contracts there, along with the projected advertisement date and the category, if it is a set-aside, and the procurement methodology. And then another slide for Charleston. This is focused mainly on DLA, on some work that's being done for DLA across the nation at different facilities that they have. and the projected advertisement dates in third and fourth quarter of 18, and the different award values and set-aside categories. And then now I'll shift gears to Jacksonville District. Jacksonville District has a pretty robust program. Jacksonville is also doing a harbor deepening. And a lot of these harbor deepenings that are occurring in South Atlantic Division are because of the work that's going on following the Panama Canal, the additional lock that occurred there, and really increased global traffic in our deep draft ports across the region. We're seeing a lot of growth in our ports. Port of Miami is complete. Jacksonville Port is underway. The Savannah Port is underway. The Charleston Port is underway. The Mobile Harbor Port is in the study phase. It's pretty far along in the study phase. And then Wilmington is also executing a study phase to deepen their port. So there's a lot of activity going on in South Atlantic Division. Even the port down in Tampa, there's some work going on in Tampa. Port Everglades also has pending work coming out. So this kind of lays out what we see in the near term as far as dredging opportunities. That's top work you'll see in the column, along with some civil construction for jetty repairs down at Ponce de Leon. That one's, they're still working through that. There'll be some additional dates that come out on that one a little bit later. But this just gives you kind of a flavor of the work that's going on in Jacksonville District. Next slide here is, and this just shows, again, FY18 work that's scheduled. And a lot of this is dredging and civil construction going on in the Jacksonville AOR. And you notice at the bottom, Tampa Harbor is one of those projects that is being put out for solicitation later this year. This slide shows additional work, and you can see this is mainly civil construction, 2 dredging, O&M dredging projects down on the bottom. And these are not just projects, these are MATOCs that'll go out, and there's two categories of those. One is specifically for small business, not to exceed $45 million. And then the large one on the bottom, $450 million, is unrestricted MATOC that'll go out for all the large dredging companies to compete against. And then there'll be a number of companies selected as part of that multiple award task order contract. So you see the target dates on those for advertisement coming up very, very soon, and then we'll have an award later this year. These are some additional kind of A&E services and professional services contracts that Jacksonville has going on. The top one there is in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and the Antilles, and then the 4 bottom opportunities here are in the state of Florida. And you'll see the different categories, estimated awards, options, and base and option configurations on some of the topo and hydrographic surveying contracts. Also, hydrological testing and monitoring. And again, some of this helps support our efforts in all the O&M work we do up and down the coast of Florida, also the work we do in the Everglades and Herbert Hoover Dike in making sure that we can execute that work. And then I'll shift gears now to Mobile District. Jacksonville District and Mobile District are 2 of our largest districts in South Atlantic Division. And again, you know, when I was talking about earlier back in the military programs lay down, the big shift for Mobile is before BRAC and for Savannah also is that they were doing a lot of MILCON. And now what Mobile District's doing they're doing a lot of civil works, and they're also doing a lot of reimbursable work. This is kind of a lay down of their customers, pretty diverse customer stakeholders that they have. 7 Army installations, 10 Air Force installations, 3 NASA Space Centers. They're also doing work for 7th Special Forces Group, the Veterans Affairs, and other DIA, FBI, and a lot of other federal agencies. So there's a lot of work going on in the Mobile District on that what we refer to as reimbursable work. So this is just kind of a lay down of some A&E opportunities that are coming up in third quarter FY18 and first quarter FY19 for A&E services. The top one is for Central and South America. That's part of our AOR, and also the Mobile District AOR, which includes the previous map that was on that slide that shows all of the customers that they have. And this is a pretty big A&E Planning and Environmental Division MATOC or SATOC that's coming out with an estimated award value of $250 million. So I wanted to show you that. And then these are some of the construction opportunities that Mobile District has coming up in third quarter 18 and first quarter 19 and fourth quarter 18. This sort of lays that down, gives you some ranges on the estimated award values and the different types of projects on the left-hand side, and then the set-aside category. On this slide, there's a lot of unrestricted. There's some small business set-asides, and then the procurement method is on the right. There's some design build and then also some design bid build and IFBs. So you'll just get a flavor of the work. And then the last, I'll just cover the last two there. Those are mainly our civil, and this is work that we're doing following Hurricane Katrina. We refer to it as MISSIP, Mississippi Coastal Improvement Program. And this is really repair of the barrier islands out in the Mississippi Sound. So this work is well underway, and this is phase 2 and phase 5 of the work that's going on in Mobile currently. And then just shifting gears, some more construction work here. You'll see in Herbert Field in Florida and also in Eglin, some of the work that's going on in Fort Rucker, Alabama. And again, these are design bid build contracts. They're going out with the later in 18 and 19. Savannah District, I'll run through what they have in their programs. Savannah also has, that's not included in this presentation, they have the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project, and so there are additional contracts for inner harbor dredging that'll be coming out later this year, and probably fourth quarter, and that's a continuation of the work that's been done on the outer harbor. They also are doing additional work for a fish passage that'll come up sometime probably in 19. We expect that to go out once that the plans for that get finalized as part of a mitigation feature for the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project. And then you'll see here, these are mainly our military installations in the Savannah District's AOR, Fort Stewart, Seymour Johnson Air Base, Moody Air Force Base, Fort Gordon, and Robbins Air Force Base. And this is just some of the work that's going on there. Additional work here, family housing replacement, replacing fuel truck offload facilities, a school, and a training support facility at Fort Benning, with the dates for ready to advertise, and opening bids coming up this year. Additional work at Fort Gordon and Fort Benning. You'll see the RTA and advertised dates as well as the open bid dates. And then there's some additional work here at Fort Bragg. The first one there is our energy program, and so that's what that project entails. And then some additional construction for the Army at Fort Stewart, Fort Benning, and Fort Gordon, Georgia. And so you'll see some of the pretty diverse work that's going on across the region. Part of the work we're doing at Fort Gordon is the cyber work for the Cyber Center and the Cyber Center of Excellence. You'll see the Cyber Center Excellence Battle Lab. That's all part of the work that's going on at Fort Gordon. That's one of the Army's top priorities for the work that we've got going on there. And then additional work at Fort Gordon, Fort Benning, and Fort Bragg, and with those advertised dates later in 2018 and early into 2019. 2020 MILCON, and this is kind of way out again. This is probably subject to additional movement as occurs in the MILCON program based on priorities and funding. But this is what we're seeing right now as far as looking out in the FY20 MILCON schedule. And then this is something that I'm sure there's a lot of interest in. We have some FY18 construction and Indefinite delivery order contracts, IDC awards pending for this year, and so we have 4 identified here that'll start in March 18, this coming month. We also have a phase 1 for East Georgia SATOC. Will be in March of 2018. We have a North Carolina MATOC in phase 1 of April 2018, and then we have a Georgia South Carolina MATOC in April 2018. And you can see 2 of them are unrestricted contracts, and 2 of them are small business, 1 SATOC and 1 MATOC. And then our last district that I'll cover is the Wilmington district. And the key things with Wilmington, you know, they have their majority of their program is at Fort Bragg. They do have some additional military facilities at Matsu, but the majority of their work is for special operations at Fort Bragg. So you'll see just kind of an indication of the top work they have scheduled. It has some of it has already advertised. Some of it is pending advertisement for different facilities at Fort Bragg and also at Matsu. And then this is some additional work at Matsu and Fort Bragg coming up for 18 and 19. And it's a mix of work and different acquisition strategies that they use to execute this work. That just gives you an indication of what that work is. And then so on the civil works side for 18, they have some additional work on the civil side, and you see the contract values for that work, and that's mainly related to some of the O&M requirements that we have for our facilities, either our hydropower plants or our lake projects, or some of the things that we do for maintenance upgrades and operations and maintenance. And then we have also some maintenance contracts that are coming out. This is a pretty small one on the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway that was advertised back in August. So that one has already went out. And then there's some additional projects you'll see coming out later this summer and this fall in Wilmington to get at some of the dredging that they need to accomplish this fiscal year. Again, some additional civil works contracts at our recreation areas with the contract values and the acquisition strategies and the advertisement dates projected. So that covers kind of our districts and the workload that we see them accomplishing over the next couple of years. Just wanted to kind of provide that to you because I know there's a lot of interest in what we've got going on in the region. And again, we can't do it without our contractors providing that support to us to help us execute this workload. What I'd like to do now is kind of go back up globally and talk a little bit on the MIL program side and the civil side on some updates that occurred recently, just so that you're aware of this. So I'll start with the military program update. Recently passed National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. It was signed into law, and there was a change. There were two key changes in that law. One is it increased unspecified minor military construction. It raised the limit to $6 million from $3 million previously, and it also eliminated the provision of the requirement for only health, life, and safety provisions. So that opens up that opportunity for unspecified minor military construction in the NDAA. And then the second key thing that Congress did is, and this is related to military construction or military family housing projects that cost greater than $40 million. And so if any of those projects have increases, cost increases of 25% or more, now there's some notification, congressional notification requirements and reporting that has to be done by senior engineer authorities that supervise these military construction projects and military housing projects. So there's a section 2851A that there'll be specific reporting requirements within 6 months, notifying the appropriate authorization and appropriation committees that those cost increases have occurred. And then just a little bit of an update on where we are with 2018 appropriations. You probably saw that there was a bipartisan budget act approved a couple of weeks ago. However, that only really focused on an emergency supplemental, and it reestablished a continuing resolution into March. And I'll talk about that a little more as far as what we expect. But the bottom line on this for military construction is that until we get an appropriation, we can't make an FY2018 MILCON award. We can't award prior year's projects because we already have that authorization and appropriate. The funds are on hand, so we can do that. But it normally takes about 45 days after the President's signature to start awarding those MILCON projects. So we're going to have a lot of late award projects, third quarter, fourth quarter this fiscal year. Some of those will push into FY19 just because of the status of funding. And then the feedback we're getting right now is that the Defense Act will likely be wrapped into an omnibus bill, and an omnibus bill is just a series of bills put together and passed as a large group of projects. So that's what we expect on the military program side. On the civil program, and I'll give you a little update on that too, we're under continuing resolution until the 23rd of March, and or until Congress passes an appropriation bill, whichever one comes first. And you know, just based on what we've seen in the past, there's quite a bit of work going on related to this. And then I'll shift gears and talk about what happened in this bipartisan budget bill of 2018. We refer to it as the FY18 Emergency Supplemental Bill. And what that did is it allocated and appropriated $17.4 billion to the Corps of Engineers. And it's broken up into multiple categories. I'll quickly go through those, but our investigations category received $135 million. And you know, in that previous slide, I talked about the program slide for Civil Works. I talked about that little blue line on the bottom of that chart had gotten progressively smaller and smaller. And so Congress has recognized that our planning capability is essential to help mitigate some of the flood risk and coastal storm damage that we are seeing from some of these extreme events that we have, like Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So of that $135 million, $75 million was specifically allocated to those 3 storms, and that all those funds must be used in the states that had more than one flood-related event in FY14, 15, 16, or 17. So they kind of caveat, give us boundaries on what those funds can be used for. They'll be submitted up to headquarters USACE and looked at there. And then construction, about $15 billion for construction, and again, that's focused on different areas that were impacted by the hurricanes, and then also for Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, it's 100% federal funding, and 902, Section 902, which is the 20% cost exceedance, is waived, and they also gave us a $50 million in Continuing Authorities program. So that's additional work that we'll be doing over the next several years to execute what Congress has given us in this emergency supplemental. They also gave us $608 million in operations and maintenance to repair damages to our waterways and projects impacted by not just the 3 hurricanes this year, but other storms that impacted the Corps. And then we also received $810 million in flood control and coastal emergencies, and that'll be a lot of the coastal storm damage reduction projects, the beach projects that were impacted. They will receive 100% federal funding and brought back to full, complete template following those storms. And then the Mississippi River and Tributaries project also received $770 million in funding, and that's the key focus there. The next 2 bullets, I'll cover those quickly. President Trump also at the State of the Union rolled out his infrastructure initiative, and that initiative is not just focused on funding. A lot of people's been asking, well, how much funding is going to come in the federal budget? And what we've seen in the discussion and talking points that have came out from the administration is they identified 6 principles. Part of that is funding. They want to leverage about $200 billion in federal funds, but they also want to leverage an additional at least $1.5 trillion in infrastructure investments with partners at the state, local, tribal, and private level. So they're trying to bring additional funds in to leverage private sector to help work some of the infrastructure challenges that we have in the United States. And so additionally, what President Trump has focused on is in the principles is investing in rural America. Part of that funding will be focused on rural America. It also increases state and local authority. He wants to return decision-making authority back to the state and local governments, and then also eliminating regulatory barriers. He wants to eliminate barriers that prevent virtually all infrastructure projects from being officially developed and managed. And that means for us more flexibility in managing our water infrastructure projects. It also impacts our regulatory program as far as streamlining permitting that will work. What they've laid out is they're trying to establish a one agency, one decision structure for environmental reviews. So that's some of the things that are coming out. And then the last one is investing in our country's most important assets, its people. So those are kind of the principles related to President Trump's infrastructure initiative. There'll be more coming out in that, I'm sure, in Congress and additional discussions and budgets later in the out years. And then I've already talked about the out year funding and kind of what's shaping up. But the bottom line here is South Atlantic Division has a lot of resources currently. We have additional resources we're expecting in the 2018 appropriations, both on the MILC program side and the civil side. And we're looking forward to working with a partnership with our with private sector to help us execute this tremendous mission that we have in South Atlantic Division. And so I'll stop there and open it up for any questions that you may have.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Lee, for that excellent overview with some great information. At this time, there's been one question submitted, and it's probably related to some earlier slides. But one participant asked if there were dollar amounts and set-aside status for the Savannah MILCON projects like you had for the other districts.
That's a good question. I was on the phone with the DPM. You know, one thing that when I was looking at slides over the last couple of days, you got 5 different districts with 5 different formats. And one of the things I was talking to Mike Sadow, who is the military programs chief there in Savannah, is that probably the best way to find that is go to Savannah's website, and they should have that information. If they don't, I would highly recommend reaching out to Mike Sadow, and that's S-Y-D-O-W, and I'm sure he can direct you to the appropriate people within his organization that can give you those contract values. Additionally, we're going to have some panelists down in Tampa next week from Mobile and Jacksonville. I know that's not the Savannah area for the specific question. Our small business deputies from those 2 districts will be there at the event next week in Tampa, and should also have some additional information from the 5 districts in our region. So hopefully that'll help you, and if you are unable to get that, you're welcome to send me an email, and I'll make sure that we get that information sent out to you and to the post down in Tampa, so that the rest of the members can see that information also.
All right, that's the only question I had submitted. If there's any others, I'll give you a couple seconds here to put one in. But anyway, I would like to say thank you again to Mr. Lee and for all of our participants today for taking time to join us. We'll see if any more questions come in, but I'll just kind of wrap up in case there aren't. We do have 2 events coming up next week. Like I said, the JTED is next Tuesday. The Icebreaker starts it off at 6 p.m. on the Victory Ship in downtown Tampa. And then the actual Joint Training Education Day will be all day Wednesday, February 28th on MacDill Air Force Base. We'd love to have you down here in Tampa. We hope you can join us. And on behalf of the Society of American Military Engineers, the Tampa Bay Post, SAME National, we really appreciate your participation. And we hope this webinar has been useful and informative. As a reminder, this was recorded, so you can tell others who might have missed it, and the slides will be made available on the SAME Tampa Post website. I don't see any other questions coming in, so that will conclude today's webinar. You may now disconnect, but appreciate your attendance and have a wonderful day.